Okay, so let's talk about economies. And on a global level, we're at a crossroads. It really is a pretty precarious position to be in as far as global economies are concerned, because we live in a bubble economy. Every country, there's not a nation that isn't untouched by the bubbles that we've built for ourselves. And so it's important to understand what a bubble economy is. What I recommend everybody do is, if you have a chance, some of us have actually read this book, Aftershock, and there's another book that Clark had pointed out called Aftershock for Investors. I believe that's what it was called. I'm going to give Mike to Clark real quick and verify that. Or, yeah, Mike to Clark, not Clark to Mike. Is that true, Clark? Is it called Aftershock for Investors?
No, it's called Aftershock Investor.
Oh, Aftershock Investor. Okay, thank you. I personally haven't read that book yet, but Clark said that it was very beneficial to him. Now, who's the author again?
Bob Widmer.
Widmer.
Same person that. In fact, there are three investors: Bob and his brother, and a lady with the last name of I believe it's Spitzer.
Yeah, that's right. That's very familiar. Great books to read. It'll help understand what the bubble economy really is doing to us as investors and just as citizens in the respective countries we live in. Let me get to the next slide. So if you want to check out that book, read it. It'd be a great read. It's not too difficult to get through, and it really gives a lot of credibility to what we're facing here in today's societies. With that, our bubbles that we have in our economies are created with fiat money. And this is money that is printed and is no longer backed by gold. And there isn't a country that hasn't used this or isn't using this currently right now. I know that we're dealing with China is buying up a lot of gold, and that's where they're putting most of their wealth is into actually buying up the gold to hopefully create a global currency that is backed by gold. And so when we talk about fiat money, it's controlled by central banks. The central banking system is something we'll talk about in the fiat the fiat and gold standard in the next session. So the thing to keep in mind is that the banks control it, so the power lies outside of the hands of the users. And their whole goal is to create a one world government objective. And we need to recognize how that's going to affect us as foreign exchange investors and what we can do to protect ourselves from missing out on the shifts that may occur and can occur very quickly. And we saw how Greece actually had, there's actually other countries, but Greece just in the last couple of years had a run on their monies and dealt with some pretty harsh economic challenges. And this is kind of where that is all sliding towards. So we need to be aware of that and how that applies to us. So let me explain why this is such a big concern. There are 5 forms of government. There's a monarchy, oligarchy, democracy, republic, and anarchy. So I'm going to break down and go through all these and explain how they work and how they apply to economies and how they govern and regulate economies. And that can help us get a foundation for the rest of the sessions that we're going to talk about, the other portions in this program. Okay, so my question to you is, are there really that many governments? That many forms of government? Well, let's look at monarchy. A monarchy is a group of people that put forth one of their members as a figurehead, a king with his noblemen or a dictator with his bureaucrats, for examples. Okay, there's only one stable form of government, and we're going to talk about that. An oligarchy, ruled by a group. Most nations are controlled by a powerful few, most common historically and today are oligarchies, or a form of oligarchism. Now, the only stable forms of government that we're focusing on again are oligarchies. So the monarchy really doesn't have much stability in the fact that once the people decide, hey, that's enough, they typically get overthrown and or lose control. So let's focus on the oligarchy and the different forms of oligarchism in the following three, and we'll talk about how many governments there really are and how stable are they. Okay, in a democracy, majority rules. The flaw in this form of government is that the majority is not restrained and they can choose to take things away, like an individual's homes, business, or children, or determine regulation on specific commodities or business practices. And if the majority is uneducated on an issue, they can bring about unwanted, harsh, and damaging results. And I apologize for that rooster out there crowing. He's decided that it's morning, and I keep telling him that he needs to be quiet because the sun's already up. So I apologize for hearing that in the background. So with this form of government, we can, or as far as stability, we can rule out a democracy as being a stable form of government. Okay, let's talk about anarchy, where there's no government. Rule created by crisis or forces conflicts to affect a change by the power-hungry that are seeking power. The people become tired of the crisis and run to the source of the conflict, asking those power-hungry seekers to fix it. And they take control and become an oligarchy. Okay, so we can rule out anarchy because it ends up turning into an oligarchy. And so let's break this down even further. Okay, republic. It's ruled by law, a set of rules that govern everyone with equity, even the government. It protects its citizens from each other, outside governments, and from itself. Now let's go back to historic Greece, city-states of Greece and democracy to oligarchy, how they progressed from that format to the fall of Rome. Greece created a fixed body of law, and Rome created 12 tables of Rome created 12 tables of Roman law, and this was something that was practiced for quite a few centuries. Okay, they were a republic form of government, recognized that as a republic form of government, they recognize when government grows, the people's freedoms recede. So in Greece's city-states, elected officials used government controls to take from one to give to another through agriculture, subsidies, housing and welfare programs, rising taxes, and controls over the private sector. Now, consider where you currently live and the governments that you live under today. Do any of those sound familiar, things that are happening? They should. Okay, so the results of what went on with the democracy is that production and quality diminishes, shortages are created, empty hands search for governmental bailouts, mobs form demanding needs from the government, freedom is exchanged for security, which leads to an oligarchy with the progression of the Caesars. And we saw that historically, and we see it happening today. Okay, so there's two forms of stable government, where a democracy and an anarchy always flip over into an oligarchy. The republic protects itself, its members, and its government from each other and from outside forces. Okay, so we come down to two forms of a republic, or of a government that stand stable in history. Okay, so let's talk about how economics plays a role in these government forms. Okay, capital is the measure of production. Okay, there's different forms of capital: tools, machinery, and people. Now this is how governments measure what capital is to them. And I guess you can even take it down and break it down into a household. You know, the number of people in a household actually affect the economy of that household. More hands can help with the chores and making sure things get done. There's obviously more mouths to feed, or less mouths to feed, depending upon the size of the family. So similar types of things can be even broken down into smaller societal measures and units. Okay, so tools, machinery, and people are what governments consider capital. And you yourself can consider those things that you have capital as well. So, here's the question that is worth $1 million. Which economies are capitalistic systems? All economies are capitalistic. Yeah, communist economic systems versus the free market system. Let's talk about how that plays a role in what we see in today's economies and global bubbles. The only difference between these two is the ownership. Okay, so let's break it down and do a comparison side by side. In a communistic economy, it's very monopolistic and state-controlled. In a free market economy, we're looking at competitive entrepreneurialism. It's a free enterprise system where everyone is free to self-regulate, to transact with one another, and effect exchange in the market. Okay, so then we go from monopolistic to competitive. The monopolistic is geared around ownership by the state and by private entities that are state-controlled. And it all gears back to what the state wants. In the competitive market, it's owned privately and controlled privately by the citizens. Monopolistic also results in high prices and low quality, and why improve if there's no competition to make a better product or service? In a competitive market, results in honest, thrifty, hard-working producers. Low prices and high quality prevail. Competition in excellence. So you rise to the top if you have the best thing. Through the world, the free market system is preferred, but it isn't always allowed. Okay, so let's talk about how that is affected by the different forms of government that control the economies. Now keep in mind the two forms of government we talked about, oligarchy and republic, and then pay attention to how these other catalysts are used in those two different forms. Okay, state-controlled economies. The first one is fascism, the most effective of the state-controlled. Government does not have title to the businesses, but regulates the business owners how, what, where, and when they produce, where to buy raw materials, who to hire and fire, and sets the costs. Business owners feel they own their business and act as such with daily details and the upkeep of the business. Business is regulated, though. That is the key component in fascism. The next one is Nazism. It's National Socialism. Government takes ownership of certain industries and regulates all others. Then we have Socialism. Government owns major industry sectors such as transportation, communications, and utilities, which leverages control over the other industries. With the vital sectors owned and regulated, agencies gain control over everything else. So you can see this progression into these state-controlled economies as to the various levels of and approaches that are taken, whether it be fascism, Nazism, or socialism, how they take and regulate things and or control and give that false sense of security. And then the final one here is communism. This is the most honest of the four. The government owns everything without pretense. There's no facade put up. Okay, so what does this all mean for us as traders? Well, first of all, let me ask you this question. What kind of economy and government-run programs are affecting you as a trader? And we all come from different backgrounds, so the answers are probably going to be very varied in what we hear. But the one thing to keep in mind is that we have to have an understanding of where we're at economically and what forms of government manage and regulate what we're doing and how we're doing it. And we've seen a lot happen. Those of us that live in the U.S., we've seen a lot of regulation come down the pipeline the last few years in the Forex market that have really hindered how and where and what we can do as traders. Thank goodness we haven't been regulated out of being able to even participate in the market, but we've seen some pretty steep changes in what we're allowed to do and not do. And so as we talk about the Forex market in the next few segments as well, in part with the other topics, the other investing tools and vehicles that we can participate with, keep in mind what type of government you're having to pay taxes to and you pay tribute to, so you can understand how and where to move with your respective plans and goals and what you're allowed to do, because there are certain things that we'll talk about that may not be something you can participate in legally where you live, but there's other things that you can do. And so we're going to try to cover a lot of different different areas and cover a lot of ground to make sure that we're helping facilitate an understanding of what you can do to build a game plan for yourself. Okay, so in the next segment, this went a little bit faster than I thought it would. I thought we'd go to about 30 minutes, but we'll take some time and talk about this, open up for discussion. But in the next session, we're going to talk about fractional reserve banking and how that creates the fiat system that fights against the gold standard, and how that plays a role in us as traders, as well as what we can do to hedge against it, to protect ourselves. Are there any questions to this point? I know I went pretty fast. We can go back and revisit some topics if you need me to. Okay, the question comes in, what is the definition of a fiat currency and its ramifications? Okay, a fiat currency is a currency that is no longer backed by gold. And if your government is printing money like crazy, it's because they're creating a false sense of security with that fiat. And the ramifications are, if there's ever a run on the banks and people want their value, there's no value there. And so we'll actually talk about fractional reserve here for a little bit. When a bank does fractional reserve banking, what they're doing is they're saying, okay, we have, for example, $1,000 worth of asset. Okay, we whether it's gold or real estate or some other type of resource that they hold reserve on, or a note on that proves ownership. What they'll do is they will lend out against that $1,000 worth of value, whatever that asset is, that commodity. Let's just say gold, for example. Let's say they have $1,000 worth of gold, but they'll fractionally lend that out in small increments to up to 10 times more notes than what they have in value. And so now that if any one of those borrowers want to go get their money back or pay their, any of those, they're the lender and the borrower wants to cash in on their loan that they've went against, or they've paid off. The bank's making money. I'm not doing a very good example here. I'm trying to figure out how to word this. Tongue-tied, that rooster's bugging me. Apologize about my farm life here. What they're doing is they're lending out more, and we'll go into more detail again on the next session, than what they have actually an asset.